Ancient stories whisper of places that feel more real than memory. We are about to journey through 35 of the most enchanting and mysterious magical realms from global mythology. By the end, you will possess a map to the greatest lost worlds ever dreamed by humanity. We will uncover why a sunken city still haunts our oceans and what secret lies hidden beyond the north wind. Which legendary paradise do you believe could have been real? A single garden stands as the ultimate symbol of paradise lost. In the heart of this realm grew two miraculous trees, the tree of life, promising immortality, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, holding the secret of moral awareness. This was a world of perfect harmony where humanity lived in a state of pure innocence, unaware of suffering or death. The story of the fall of a single forbidden act that introduced choice, shame, and exile into the world is one of the most powerful narratives ever told. It transformed the Garden of Eden from a mere location into the universal metaphor for a golden age we can never return to, a perfection we are always seeking. This deep-seated longing for a return to paradise has fueled countless expeditions and theories about its earthly location. Some have searched for it at the source of 4 great rivers mentioned in ancient texts, looking to the Fertile Crescent of Mesopotamia. Others have suggested it lies beneath the Persian Gulf, or that it was a memory of a land since drowned by rising seas. Was it a real geographical place that was simply lost to time, or is its power found entirely in its spiritual meaning, a story explaining our own complex human nature? The search for Eden itself reflects our eternal desire to find a tangible connection to that first flawless world. Yet this longing for a perfect beginning is rivaled by a fascination with a spectacular end. From the ancient Greek philosopher Plato comes the story of a different kind of paradise, one not of simple innocence but of staggering ambition. This was Atlantis, a mighty island empire said to exist beyond the Pillars of Hercules. Plato described it not as a simple garden but as a marvel of engineering and power. Its capital city was a breathtaking arrangement of concentric rings, alternating between water and land, creating a series of harbors and defensive moats that protected the heart of the kingdom. At its center stood a grand temple to the god Poseidon, a testament to its divine favor and unmatched wealth. The Atlanteans were a people of immense sophistication, possessing technologies and knowledge that seemed to eclipse all other civilizations of their time. But their greatness curdled into arrogance. According to the story, they became a corrupt and militaristic society, launching a war to conquer the ancient world. It was then that the gods delivered their judgment. In a single, terrible day and night of fire and earthquakes, the entire island was swallowed by the sea, vanishing forever beneath the waves. This catastrophic end is what cemented Atlantis in our imagination. It is not just a lost world, but a world that was lost as a direct consequence of its own hubris. The search for its physical location has become one of history's greatest puzzles. Theorists have placed it everywhere from the Mediterranean Sea to the Caribbean, from the coast of Cyprus to the mudflats of southern Spain. Some suggest it was a memory of the Minoan civilization, devastated by a volcanic eruption. Others believe the story is a philosophical allegory, a warning about the dangers of imperial overreach that Plato invented entirely. But its legacy is undeniable. Atlantis has become the archetype of the advanced, vanished civilization, a ghost that haunts our stories from science fiction to comic books, always asking us the same haunting question. What if a society can rise to such incredible heights, only to have the ocean itself erase every trace of its existence? But while Atlantis represents a civilization punished for its pride, another legendary realm offers a promise of solace and healing. In the midst of Arthurian legend lies the Isle of Avalon, a sanctuary of profound magic. This was no fortress of concentric rings, but an island veiled in perpetual fog, a place hidden from the ordinary world. It was a land of powerful enchantresses, most notably Morgan Le Fay, who served as both a sorceress and a healer. Avalon's deep connection to King Arthur marks it as a cornerstone of British myth. It was here, according to the tales, that the great sword Excalibur was forged, its magic inextricably linked to the fate of the king and his kingdom. And after Arthur's fateful final battle at Camlan, where he was mortally wounded, it was to Avalon that he was taken. He did not travel there to die, but to be healed of his grievous wounds, sleeping until the day his people would have the greatest need for his return. This idea of a king waiting in a magical slumber transformed Avalon from a simple location into a symbol of hope and national rebirth. The search for a real-world Avalon has persistently centered on Glastonbury Tor in Somerset, England. This striking hill, rising abruptly from a flat plain, often surrounded by sea mists or floodwaters in ancient times, perfectly fits the description of an island of mystery. In the 12th century, monks at Glastonbury Abbey claimed to have discovered the graves of King Arthur and Queen Guinevere, lending a powerful, if controversial, historical weight to the site. Was this a genuine archaeological discovery or a clever fabrication to attract pilgrims and funds? The truth remains buried, but the connection endures. Whether Avalon was a physical place like Glastonbury or a purely spiritual dimension accessible only through magic, its power lies in what it represents. It is the promise that what is most precious is not always lost, but merely hidden, waiting for the right moment to emerge from the mist. Yet the hope for a hidden sanctuary did not end with the mists of Avalon. In the dizzying heights of the Himalayas, a different kind of paradise captured the modern world's imagination. This was Shangri-La, a name that now evokes an almost tangible sense of peace and seclusion. The concept first appeared in James Hilton's 1933 novel, Lost Horizon. He described it as a lush, sheltered valley, isolated from the turmoil of the outside world by impassable mountain peaks. Here, time seemed to slow its relentless march. The inhabitants of this monastery, known as the Lamasery, lived for centuries, their long lives dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge, art, and inner peace. It was a utopia free from greed, war, and the frantic pace of modern life, a place that preserved the best of human culture against the ravages of time. Hilton's story, written between two world wars, resonated deeply with a global audience yearning for an escape from a world descending into chaos. But what is truly fascinating is how quickly this fictional invention became woven into the fabric of very real spiritual traditions. Almost immediately, people began searching for a physical Shangri-La, and in doing so, they connected it to ancient Tibetan Buddhist beliefs. These traditions speak of Baal, which translates to hidden land. These are not mythical places in the sense of fantasy, but actual, physical valleys and regions believed to have been concealed by the great sage Padmasambhava over 1,000 years ago. He designated them as sacred refuges, places to be discovered in future times of great strife, when humanity would need a sanctuary to preserve spiritual teachings. The Baal are said to be accessible only to those with pure intentions and the right karma, often appearing only when the seeker is truly ready. So while Shangri-La itself was a 20th century creation, it gave a name and a new form to a very ancient and persistent human idea, the belief that somewhere, perhaps just beyond the next mountain pass, lies a valley of peace waiting to be found. This retroactive linking of a modern myth to an ancient one shows us that our longing for a hidden sanctuary is timeless. It asks us whether such places are discovered with a map or with a state of mind. The dream of a hidden valley of peace stands in stark contrast to a legend forged from pure greed. Far from the Himalayan peaks in the dense jungles of South America, a different fantasy took root, one that would set in motion centuries of desperate exploration and tragic folly. This was the legend of El Dorado, the Gilded One. Its origins, however, are far more fascinating and concrete than the mythical city it later became. The core of the story was a magnificent ritual performed by the Muisca people, who lived in the highlands of what is now Colombia. When a new leader was to ascend to the throne, he would journey to the center of Lake Guatavita. His body, covered entirely in sticky resin, would then be dusted from head to toe with fine gold dust. As the sun rose, this new ruler, a living, breathing statue of gold, would stand upon a raft laden with treasures and be pushed out into the sacred waters. At the center of the lake, he would plunge into the water, washing the gold from his body as an offering to the gods, while his attendants threw stacks of gold and emeralds into the deep. This was the real El Dorado, a powerful ceremony of sacrifice and renewal. But when fragments of this story reached the ears of Spanish conquistadors, it was twisted and amplified beyond all recognition. Their minds, already intoxicated by the plundered wealth of the Aztec and Inca empires, could not conceive of gold being given back to a lake. They heard a story about a man of gold and imagined a king who ruled a city of gold. The ritual became a place, and that place grew in grandeur with every retelling. It was no longer just a chiefdom with a sacred lake, but a kingdom of unimaginable splendor, where gold was as common as stone and temples were lined with precious jewels. This fantasy of El Dorado, the city, became an obsession that drove men to madness. Expeditions led by figures like Gonzalo Pizarro and Sir Walter Raleigh plunged into the heart of the Amazon basin, a green hell of disease, starvation, and hostile tribes. Thousands of lives, both European and indigenous, were lost in a futile search for a place that existed only on maps of desire. The legend of El Dorado, therefore, is really two distinct stories. One is the historical account of the Muisca people and their profound spiritual relationship with gold, seeing it not as currency but as a sacred material for connecting with the divine. The other is a cautionary tale of colonial avarice, a phantom that Europeans projected onto a continent they barely understood. It forces us to ask what we are truly seeking when we chase a legend. Are we looking for a real place, or are we merely chasing the reflection of our own deepest desires, no matter how destructive they may be? That same human desire for the spectacular, which conjured cities of gold, also found expression in stone and soil. Among the official 7 wonders of the ancient world, one stands out as uniquely ephemeral, a masterpiece of nature engineered by human hands. These were the legendary Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Ancient writers described them as a breathtaking artificial mountain, a series of ascending terraces that reached for the sky. They were not hanging in the sense of being suspended by ropes, but rather overhanging, with balconies and terraces built high above the ground. Upon these stone ledges, a profusion of trees, vines, and flowers grew in lush abundance, a vibrant green oasis seemingly floating in the dry Mesopotamian air. The engineering required to sustain such a garden in the heart of a desert kingdom was said to be as marvelous as the garden itself. A complex system of screws, pumps, and chains was believed to have drawn water from the Euphrates River far below, channeling it to the very top of the structure so it could cascade down from terrace to terrace, nourishing every level. The most famous story attributes this wonder to King Nebuchadnezzar II, who supposedly built it in the 6th century before the Common Era to comfort his wife, Ametes, who missed the green, mountainous landscapes of her homeland. It is a powerful and romantic tale, a king moving heaven and earth quite literally to ease his queen's homesickness. Yet here is where the historical mystery deepens to its core. Despite its fame, there is a startling lack of contemporary evidence for the gardens ever existing in Babylon. No Babylonian cuneiform tablets, of which there are thousands describing the city's grandeur, ever mention such a monumental garden. The detailed accounts we do have come from later Greek and Roman historians like Strabo and Diodorus Siculus, who wrote centuries after Babylon's peak and likely never saw the gardens themselves. This glaring absence has led many scholars to a startling alternative theory. Perhaps the Hanging Gardens were not in Babylon at all, but were a later confusion with a very real and equally spectacular garden in another Mesopotamian capital, Nineveh. There, the Assyrian king Sennacherib, in the 7th century before the Common Era, left behind extensive records describing his own palace and its magnificent gardens. His own inscriptions boast of a vast terraced pleasure garden, a wonder for all peoples, watered by a monumental system of canals and a revolutionary water-raising screw made of bronze, an invention he credited to himself. This sounds uncannily like the later descriptions of the Babylonian gardens. Is it possible that over centuries, as stories were told and retold, the location of this engineering marvel shifted from Nineveh to its more famous rival city, Babylon? The romantic story of a king building a garden for his lovesick queen may be just that, a story. The reality could be one of raw imperial power, where a king like Sennacherib reshaped the very land to demonstrate his control over nature itself. So the mystery of the hanging gardens is not merely whether they existed, but where and for what purpose. Were they a testament to love or to pride? And does it change the wonder if this legendary green mountain was built in the wrong city by the wrong king for a completely different reason? While empires built gardens of stone, the medieval mind dreamed of a kingdom of pure spirit. A rumor swept through Europe in the 12th century, a letter that promised salvation from the East. It was addressed to the Byzantine emperor and the Pope, and it claimed to be from a monarch of unimaginable power and piety, Prester John. He described his realm as a lost Christian empire, a paradise on earth overflowing with marvels. His palace was said to be made of crystal, his table of solid emerald. He ruled over 72 kings, and his lands were home to fountains of youth, pepper forests, and even the gateway to the earthly paradise itself. Most importantly, he was a fellow Christian, a Nestorian priest-king who held back the tide of Islam and longed to reunite with his Western brethren. For a Europe embroiled in the Crusades, locked in a seemingly endless struggle for the Holy Land, the letter was a divine revelation. It offered hope that they were not alone, that a mighty ally waited just beyond the known world, ready to crush their enemies in a pincer movement. This was not just a fairy tale, it was a geopolitical fantasy that shaped real-world ambition for centuries. The initial search focused squarely on Asia. Travelers like Marco Polo listened intently for any whisper of this great king as they journeyed along the Silk Road. They thought they found traces of him in the powerful Mongol Empire, especially when rumors spread of Mongol Khans converting to Christianity. Each new report from the East, each distorted account of a far-off ruler, was eagerly mapped onto the legend of Prester John, keeping the hope of his existence alive. But as European knowledge of Asia grew more accurate, the map of the myth began to tear. No vast Christian kingdom could be found in the heart of Asia. So the legend did not die, it simply packed its bags and moved. Cartographers and explorers, refusing to let go of such a powerful idea, simply redrew their mental maps. If Prester John was not in Asia, then he must be in the one continent that remained a true blank space on their charts, Africa. The myth transplanted itself with astonishing ease. Now the kingdom was said to be hidden in the highlands of Ethiopia, a land known to have an ancient Christian tradition dating back to the 4th century. This was not a random choice. Isolated by geography and surrounded by Muslim states, the Ethiopian Solomonic dynasty seemed to fit the profile perfectly. Their emperor was even referred to as the priest of God. European explorers, driven by this renewed hope, began pushing into the interior of Africa, not just for gold or slaves, but with the explicit goal of making contact with this lost Christian ally. The Portuguese, in particular, were consumed by the quest. For years, they exchanged embassies with the Ethiopian court, convinced they had finally found the legendary kingdom. The reality, of course, was a profound disappointment. The Ethiopian Empire was a real, complex, and powerful state, but it was not the mythical land of Prester John. It faced its own internal struggles and had no vast armies to send on a crusade. The fantasy finally shattered against the hard rock of reality. The enduring power of the Prester John myth lies not in its truth, but in its reflection of a deep human need. It shows us how easily hope can conjure an entire kingdom out of rumor and desire, and how a story, once believed, can compel people to cross mountains and oceans in search of a reflection of their own deepest longing for a savior. While European kings searched for a Christian ally in the East, sailors off the stormy coast of Ireland told tales of a phantom much closer to home. They spoke of High Brassel, a circular island perpetually wrapped in a dense grey mist. This was no ordinary landmass, for it was said to defy the logic of cartography, appearing on the horizon only once every 7 years, a fleeting glimpse of a world that refused to be pinned down. On those rare occasions when the veil lifted, it revealed a promised land of ancient, advanced people who lived in perfect peace and possessed great wisdom. The name itself, High Brassel, has nothing to do with the South American nation. It derives from the old Gaelic term Bresel, meaning high king or high beauty, evoking a realm of supreme splendor. What makes this myth so compelling is its stubborn presence on actual maps. For centuries, from the 1400s well into the 1800s, cartographers confidently drew High Brassel as a perfect circle located somewhere in the Atlantic, west of Ireland. It was not placed in the realm of fantasy, but charted alongside real landmarks, a testament to how deeply the sailors' stories were believed. This was not just a story, it was a navigational hazard and a destination. Many brave captains set sail towards its charted coordinates, only to find empty, rolling ocean. Yet the legends persisted, fed by the region's notoriously shifting fog banks and strange optical effects like superior mirages, which can make distant objects appear to float above the horizon. The myth of High Brassel shares a deep kinship with the story of Atlantis. Both are advanced island civilizations lost to the Atlantic Ocean. But where Atlantis represents a catastrophic fall from grace, punished for its hubris, High Brassel is a gentler mystery. It is a place that is not so much destroyed as it is hidden, a sanctuary that chooses when to reveal itself. This idea of a cyclical, accessible paradise connects it to other Atlantic phantom islands like the Welsh Cantref Gwaelod, a sunken kingdom, or the fertile Fortunate Isles of Greco-Roman myth. The persistence of High Brassel speaks to a fundamental human experience, the sighting of something just beyond reach. Was it a real island that simply sank as sea levels slowly rose after the last ice age, its memory preserved in folklore? Or was it a collective dream, a psychological landmark for people living on the rugged edge of the known world, a way to give form to the vast, terrifying, and beautiful emptiness of the open ocean? The island on the map was not just a cartographic error, it was the shape of a hope that beyond the mist a more perfect world was waiting, if only one knew the right time to look. The phantom islands of the Atlantic were not the only lost lands born from a blend of observation and desire. In the 19th century, a new continent emerged not from sailors' yarns, but from the halls of science, a land devised to solve a very specific puzzle. Zoologists were baffled by a curious distribution of wildlife. The fossilized remains of lemurs, small primates, were found in Madagascar and India, but nowhere in between. How could these creatures have crossed the vast expanse of the Indian Ocean? To the scientific minds of the day, the answer seemed obvious. They proposed the existence of a massive land bridge, a sunken continent they named Lemuria, connecting these now separated lands. This was not a mythic paradise, but a sober geological hypothesis, a necessary landmass drawn on maps to explain the migration of ancient life. For a time, Lemuria was as real to scientists as Australia, a logical solution to a perplexing natural history mystery. But the story of Lemuria was about to take a dramatic and unexpected turn. The theory was soon superseded by the science of plate tectonics, which provided a much more elegant explanation. The continents themselves were not fixed but drifted over millions of years. India and Madagascar were once joined, and their slow, grinding separation explained the lemur fossils perfectly. The scientific need for Lemuria vanished, yet the continent refused to sink. Just as it was being abandoned by geologists, it was enthusiastically embraced by a very different group, the spiritualist and esoteric movements of the late 19th century. Foremost among them was the Theosophical Society, founded by Helena Blavatsky. In her influential writings, she seized upon the scientific concept and transformed it entirely. Lemuria was no mere land bridge. In her vision, it became the Pacific counterpart to the Atlantic's Atlantis, a vast continent that was the true cradle of humanity. She described it as the home of the third root race, a primordial and spiritually attuned people who were, according to her, the direct ancestors of modern man. These Lemurians were not simple primates, but giant, egg-laying hermaphrodites with a third eye and psychic abilities, communicating through telepathy. In this new mythology, Lemuria met a cataclysmic end, destroyed by volcanoes and fire, just as Atlantis was lost to water. This spiritual adoption of a scientific theory reveals a profound pattern in how we interact with the unknown. A gap in our knowledge, once filled with a logical hypothesis, can become a vacuum for our deepest spiritual longings. Science had created a blank space on the map, and mysticism rushed in to fill it with gods, giants, and a lost golden age. The legacy of Lemuria, therefore, exists in two parallel worlds. In one, it is a footnote in the history of science, a discarded theory that helped pave the way for a greater understanding of our planet. In the other, it thrives as a powerful spiritual symbol, a Pacific Atlantis that represents a purer, more mystical origin for humankind. It makes us wonder how many of our modern mysteries might one day be solved, only to have their empty shells become the sacred lands of tomorrow. Just as Lemuria found a second life in spiritualism, another Pacific continent rose from the pages of a controversial book. The lost continent of Mu was the brainchild of a 19th century traveler and writer, Augustus Le Plongeon. After studying Mayan ruins in the Yucatan, he became convinced that the hieroglyphs there told a story of a far older civilization. He proposed that a vast continent, which he named Mu, had once stretched across the Pacific Ocean. This was not just any land, but the original cradle of all humankind, a utopian world that was the mother culture for every ancient society that followed. Le Plongeon wove an elaborate narrative asserting that when Mu was destroyed in a global cataclysm, its survivors sailed across the oceans to seed the great civilizations of Egypt and Mesoamerica. He believed he could trace direct linguistic and cultural links, interpreting Mayan inscriptions as tales of this drowned homeland. His ideas were a product of their time, reflecting a widespread, though problematic, fascination with finding a single, superior source for all human achievement. The science of his day, however, offered no support. Geologists were clear: the Pacific Ocean floor is fundamentally different from a sunken continent. It is composed primarily of dense basaltic rock, formed from rapidly cooling lava at the mid-ocean ridges, not the lighter granitic rock that makes up continental landmasses like North America or Asia. There is no geological mechanism for an entire continent to simply sink beneath the waves without leaving an immense, detectable scar on the planet's crust. Furthermore, the very premise of his theory relied on a profound misreading of Mayan writing, which modern scholars have since deciphered to tell the histories of Maya kings, not lost Pacific empires. So why did the myth of Mu endure long after its foundational claims were disproven? It was popularized and expanded by other writers, most notably James Churchward in the 1920s, who claimed to have learned the secrets of Mu from ancient tablets he discovered in India. His books described Mu as a paradise of 64 million people destroyed by underground volcanic gases. This captured the public imagination, creating a Pacific counterpart to Atlantis that felt satisfyingly symmetrical. The persistence of Mu reveals a powerful human tendency. We are often drawn to grand, unifying theories that simplify the complex, tangled threads of human history. The idea that a single, advanced culture could be the root of all others is a compelling story, far simpler than the messy reality of independent innovation and cultural exchange. It asks us whether we are seeking truth or a more elegant and dramatic story about our own past. Is our history a patchwork quilt of diverse peoples figuring things out on their own, or is it a fallen tree with all its branches tracing back to one magnificent lost trunk? The dense, untamed jungle has a way of swallowing more than just light and sound. It consumes dreams and explorers alike. In the early 20th century, this green abyss became the stage for one of history's most compelling and tragic quests, the search for a lost city that came to be known simply as Z. The man at the center of this story was not a fantasist but a seasoned British surveyor and archaeologist named Percy Fawcett. For years, he had mapped the Amazon's vast, uncharted territories for the Royal Geographical Society, and in the process, he became convinced that hidden within its deepest reaches lay the ruins of a sophisticated, ancient civilization. He called this lost world the City of Z. Fawcett was not chasing a native legend, but piecing together a theory based on fragments of evidence, old Portuguese manuscripts, and his own observations of mysterious earthworks and pottery shards. He believed the Amazon, far from being a pristine wilderness, held the ghost of a complex society that had been decimated by European diseases long before it could be properly documented. His proposed city was not a place of gold but of stone, a cradle of culture that would rewrite the history of the Americas. In 1925, with financial backing from newspapers and a deep, almost mystical conviction, Fawcett embarked on his final expedition into the Mato Grosso region of Brazil. His team was small and deliberate, consisting only of his eldest son, Jack, and Jack's lifelong friend, Rolly Rimmel. He believed a small, nimble party could succeed where a large, cumbersome one would attract unwanted attention or perish from lack of supplies. They carried supplies for years, not months. The last communication from the group was a letter Fawcett dispatched from a remote post, stating they were ready to cross into an unexplored territory he called the Dead Horse Plateau. Then silence, they vanished without a trace. This absolute disappearance is what transformed Percy Fawcett from a respected explorer into an enduring myth. The complete lack of a body, a journal, or any definitive evidence of his fate created a vacuum that imagination rushed to fill. Was he killed by a hostile indigenous tribe? Did he succumb to disease or starvation? Or, as some more romantic theories suggest, did he actually find his city and choose to remain there, living out his days in his discovered paradise? His disappearance launched a century-long obsession. Dozens of subsequent expeditions, many suffering their own casualties and disappearances, have gone into the jungle to find answers. In the 21st century, the writer David Grann retraced Fawcett's path, and his investigations suggested Fawcett may have been astonishingly close to the truth, not of a single city, but of a vast, networked civilization now being revealed by satellite imagery and LiDAR technology. We now know the Amazon was indeed home to complex societies with large towns, roads, and earthworks. The myth of Z was born from a man's rational hypothesis, but it was cemented by the jungle's absolute refusal to give up its secrets. His story forces us to ask where the line is between a visionary ahead of his time and a man tragically lost to his own obsession. Did Percy Fawcett die in pursuit of a fantasy, or did he walk into the heart of a real mystery that we are only now beginning to understand? But the sea has swallowed more than just hypothetical continents. Along the jagged coast of Brittany, a local legend speaks of a very real and tragic drowning. This is the story of Wise, a city more beautiful than any other, built by a king on the lowlands below the ocean's tide. King Gradlon, a wise and pious ruler, constructed this marvel for his daughter, the Princess Dahat. To protect his beloved city from the ever-present threat of the sea, he ordered the building of a massive, towering dike. The only entrance through this great wall was a single, locked gate, and the key to this gate was kept on a chain around the king's own neck, a constant reminder of his solemn duty. For a time, Wise was a paradise of art and music, a place of endless festivals and pleasures, all made possible by its ingenious, if precarious, design. Yet this paradise curdled from within. Under Dahat's influence, the city descended into a whirlpool of decadence and sin. The princess, it was said, held wild, hedonistic parties every night, and for each new lover she took, she demanded a strange and terrible price. She would command her suitor to bring her the key to the city gate, and together they would steal the silver key from her sleeping father's neck. She would then lead the young man through the gate to a secret tunnel where she would place a black mask upon his face. In the morning, that man would never be seen again, claimed by the sea. The city's moral decay summoned a divine judgment. A terrible storm gathered over the bay, with waves that crashed against the great dike with unnatural fury. On that fateful night, a suitor of Dahat's, perhaps a demon in disguise, succeeded in stealing the silver key from King Gradlon. He unlocked the massive gate, and the ocean, held at bay for so long, rushed in with an unstoppable, vengeful force. The king was awakened by the frantic bell ringing of Saint Winwallow, his own religious advisor. Seizing his daughter, he leapt onto his horse and fled the rising waters, scrambling for the high ground. But as the waves threatened to overtake them, a divine voice cried out that the king's salvation depended on casting the demon behind him into the sea. That demon was his own daughter, Dahat. In a moment of agonizing choice between his love for his child and the survival of his soul, King Gradlon pushed the princess from the horse. The waves instantly swallowed her, and the king rode on alone, reaching safety as his entire city vanished forever beneath the salt water. To this day, Breton fishermen will tell you that on a calm, quiet morning, you can sometimes hear the bells of the drowned cathedrals of Wise ringing up from the deep, a ghostly lament for a paradise lost not to geological chance but to human weakness. The legend serves as a powerful allegory, a stark warning that the walls we build to protect our prosperity are meaningless if we allow corruption to unlock the gate from within. It asks us what temptations we might be letting into our own lives and what keys we are carelessly allowing others to hold. Beyond the roaring ocean and the drowned bells of Wise lies a realm of a different kind of silence, a land not lost to catastrophe but preserved in a state of perfect primordial peace. This is Dilmun, the sacred paradise of the ancient Sumerians, written into existence on clay tablets over 4,000 years ago. It is described not as a city or a kingdom, but as a pure and bright land, a place where the sun god Utu rose each day and where the lion did not kill, the wolf did not snatch the lamb. In Dilmun there was no sickness, no old age, and no word for death. It was a world washed clean of sorrow, a garden where the gods themselves resided. For a civilization intimately familiar with the harsh realities of the Mesopotamian desert, this vision of a land free from suffering and decay must have been a powerful spiritual anchor. But Dilmun was far more than just a divine retirement home. It was a place of profound beginnings, the very site where the mother goddess Ninhursag was said to have brought 8 sacred plants into being, a story echoing with the same themes of Genesis found in later garden myths across the world. Its most famous connection, however, is to humanity's first great epic hero, Gilgamesh. After the death of his wild companion Enkidu, the mighty King Gilgamesh is shattered by grief and his own mortality. His entire quest transforms into a desperate search for the secret of eternal life. His journey leads him across the waters of death to speak with Utnapishtim, the Mesopotamian Noah, the one mortal who was granted immortality by the gods. And where does this immortal sage reside? In Dilmun. This places the Sumerian paradise at the very heart of humanity's oldest recorded struggle with the fear of death. Gilgamesh learns that the immortality he seeks is not for him, but but the location of his failure solidifies Dilmun's meaning. It is the unattainable ideal, the state of being that mortals can glimpse and even visit but can never truly possess. So where was this land of the ever-living? The ancient texts provide clues, describing it as a place where the sun rises, a land of fresh, sweet water. For many scholars, the evidence points compellingly to the islands of modern-day Bahrain in the Persian Gulf. This was a major center of trade and a source of precious freshwater springs in antiquity, an emerald in a maritime desert, making it a logical candidate for a blessed, life-giving realm. The identification feels strangely fitting. To stand on the soil of Bahrain today is to stand in a place that has been considered sacred for millennia, a real-world anchor for one of our oldest dreams. Was Dilmun a real geographical location that inspired a myth of perfection, or was the myth so powerful that it was projected onto a real and prosperous land? Dilmun asks us whether paradise is a place we can find on a map, or if it is simply the shape our deepest longing takes when we confront the one mystery that has haunted us since the beginning, the undeniable truth of our own end. While the gods offered eternal life in Dilmun, the medieval peasant dreamed of a far more immediate paradise. In the weary minds of those bound to the land and the lords who ruled it, a fantasy took root, a land of pure, unapologetic gluttony and leisure known as Kokani. This was not a spiritual sanctuary or a lost city of gold, but a world turned upside down where the relentless struggle for daily bread was magically erased. Here, the ultimate luxury was not wisdom or power, but the complete abolition of work. In this realm, roasted pigs did not wait to be hunted. They wandered the countryside helpfully carrying carving knives in their own backs, offering themselves for an easy meal. The very landscape was edible, with mountains of pure cheese and houses built from gingerbread and cake. The weather itself was perfectly obedient, with warm, gentle rains of sweet wine and snowfalls of powdered sugar. Rivers of rich gravy flowed alongside streams of milk, and baked fish would simply swim to the shore and leap onto your plate. This was a world where the social order was not just inverted but deliciously devoured. The harsh discipline of feudal life, with its endless labor and meager rations, was replaced by a perpetual, chaotic feast where laziness was the greatest virtue. The fantasy of Kokani served as a form of psychological escape, a collective daydream for a class of people whose lives were defined by scarcity and toil. It was a humorous, almost rebellious vision that mocked the very foundations of their reality. Why chase a holy grail when you could live in a land where the fences were made of sausages? This myth, passed down in poems and folk tales, reveals a universal human truth. When faced with unyielding hardship, our imaginations do not always turn to noble ideals. Sometimes the most profound paradise is simply a place where you can finally and forever stop being hungry. A world of endless feasting and leisure offered one kind of escape, but the ancient Greeks envisioned a paradise that rewarded not gluttony but glory. Far from the sunless misery of the common dead in Hades, there existed a blessed realm reserved only for the most exceptional mortals. This was the Elysian Fields, a sun-drenched plain at the very edge of the world, where the air was always gentle and the inhabitants knew neither snow nor winter. Here, the souls of heroes, great poets, and those judged righteous by the gods lived a life of perfect, effortless peace. They enjoyed the favor of the gods themselves, passing their time in athletic contests, musical performances, and tranquil conversation, a reflection of the ideal Greek life but purified of all pain and strife. This was the ultimate reward for a life lived with courage and virtue, a retirement home for the epic. Its stark contrast to the asphodel meadows, the grey, ghost-filled waiting room for the average soul, and the torturous pits of Tartarus underscores a profound belief. The Greeks saw the afterlife not as a uniform destination, but as a direct consequence of one's earthly actions. Your fate was not predestined, it was earned. The myth of Elysium evolved dramatically over time. especially as Greek philosophy began to ponder deeper questions of morality. In the works of poets like Pindar, the criteria for entry shifted subtly. It was no longer just for warriors blessed by the gods, but for those who had kept their oaths and lived a just life. By the time of Plato, the concept was fully philosophized. In his dialogues, he describes a cycle of reincarnation where souls spend 1,000 years in either Tartarus for punishment or Elysium for reward, only to then choose their next life. In this view, Elysium became a temporary state of bliss and learning, a school for the soul before it faced its next great test. This transformed the Elysian fields from a simple warrior's rest into a crucial component of a cosmic justice system, a place where ethical living was finally and eternally repaid. What does this evolution tell us? It reveals a civilization wrestling with the idea of fairness, slowly replacing a system that favored only the divinely connected with one that valued inner character. The promise of Elysium asked every Greek a powerful question. Is a heroic death enough, or must a life be truly good to earn a peaceful forever? High above the world of men, perched at the very top of the world tree Yggdrasil, stood the fortress of the gods. Asgard was the domain of the Aesir, a tribe of deities as fierce and formidable as the northern lands they ruled. Unlike the gentle paradise of Dilmun or the leisurely feast of Kakani, this was a realm of raw power, sacred oaths, and inevitable doom. A shimmering rainbow bridge known as Bifrost connected this celestial stronghold to the human world of Midgard, a vibrant tether between the mortal and the divine, vigilantly guarded by the watchman Heimdall. Within Asgard's mighty walls lay its most famous hall, Valhalla, the Hall of the Slain. Here, the great god Odin, the All-Father, gathered the bravest warriors who had fallen in battle. This was no quiet afterlife of rest, but an eternal preparation for the final war. Each day, these honored dead, the Einherjar, would battle one another upon the fields of Asgard, honing their skills to a razor's edge. And each evening, their wounds would miraculously heal, and they would feast on the meat of a magical boar and drink mead from the udder of a divine goat. This cycle of daily combat and nightly celebration was the ultimate reward for a Viking's courage, a perpetual training ground for a destiny already written in the stars. That destiny was Ragnarök, the twilight of the gods. Norse mythology is unique in its insistence that even the gods are not eternal. Asgard itself is central to a prophecy of its own destruction, a cataclysmic series of events involving a great winter, the breaking of bonds, and the release of monstrous forces like the wolf Fenrir and the serpent Jörmungandr. The gods, alongside the Einherjar, would march out from Valhalla to face this final battle on the field of Vigridr, fighting against the giants and chaos itself in a confrontation they knew they would lose. This profound acceptance of a doomed fate is what gives Asgard its tragic grandeur. It was not a permanent paradise, but a glorious fortress built in the full knowledge that it would one day fall. The gods of Asgard were not distant, perfect beings, but figures of immense passion, wisdom, and flaw, who chose to spend their eternity not in passive bliss, but in active, courageous defiance of their end. So why did this vision of a heaven that ends in fire resonate so deeply? Perhaps because it mirrors our own human struggles more closely than any eternal paradise. It speaks of finding meaning not in avoiding the final battle, but in the quality of the fight itself, in the courage of the warriors who feast in the great hall, knowing full well what the dawn will eventually bring. Yet the stark courage of Asgard was not the only destiny the Norse heavens held. High in the branches of the world tree Yggdrasil, nestled close to the home of the gods, lay a realm of pure, ethereal light. This was Alfheim, the world of the light elves. Where Asgard was a fortress of stone and spears, Alfheim was a land of shimmering meadows, radiant forests, and gentle, perpetual daylight. Its inhabitants were beings of breathtaking beauty, often described as more radiant than the sun itself. They were not simply magical creatures, but minor deities closely associated with the gods of the Aesir. In fact, the prose Edda tells us that Alfheim was given to the god Freyr as a tooth gift, a present for his first baby tooth. Freyr was the Norse god of peace, fertility, and prosperity, a lord of sunshine and bountiful harvests. This divine connection reveals the true nature of the Light Elves. They were spirits of life and growth, benevolent forces who influenced the fertility of the earth, the health of crops, and the very light that made life possible. To the Norse people, a sudden sunbeam breaking through storm clouds or an unexpectedly fruitful field might very well be the handiwork of an elf, a silent blessing from this luminous realm. This stands in absolute contrast to their cosmic counterparts, the dwarves, who lived in a world called Svartalfheim or Nidavellir. If Alfheim was the realm of air and light, Svartalfheim was the domain of earth and shadow, a labyrinth of caverns and forges deep beneath the mountains. The dwarves were master craftsmen, the smiths of the gods, who hammered out legendary treasures like Thor's mighty hammer Mjolnir and Odin's magical ring Draupnir. But they were creatures of stone and metal, not of living plants and sunlight. The elves brought life forth while the dwarves shaped the unfeeling earth. This duality reflects a fundamental understanding of the world's balance. One realm could not exist without the other. The beauty and bounty of Alfheim required the strength and craftsmanship of Svartalfheim. The sword that protects the harvest is just as vital as the harvest itself. So the Light Elves were more than just fairy tale figures. They personified the fragile, beautiful essence of life that the Norse saw in their own world, a luminous force that, while separate from humanity, was forever intertwined with its survival and its joys. What would our own world look like if we could see these subtle energies at work, the delicate balance between the forces that create life and those that shape its tools? But the luminous beauty of Alfheim was only one side of the cosmic coin. Beyond the ordered realms of gods and elves lay a land of raw, untamed power. Jotunheim was the harsh and mountainous homeland of the Jotnar, the giants of Norse mythology. This was not a realm of gentle fields or shimmering halls, but a wild, frozen wilderness of jagged peaks, deep forests, and crashing rivers, a place of perpetual winter and chaotic force. The giants themselves were embodiments of this primordial chaos, representing the destructive and untamable aspects of nature, from earthquakes and avalanches to the brutal, crushing power of a glacier. Their world stood in constant, simmering conflict with the divine order of Asgard. The Aesir gods were not all-powerful creators, but rather forces of structure and civilization, forever building walls and forging treaties to hold back the encroaching chaos that Jotunheim represented. This was not a simple battle of good versus evil, but a fundamental struggle between the need for order and the undeniable power of the wild. The relationship was complex and deeply intertwined. The gods often ventured into Jotunheim not just to fight, but to seek wisdom, to test their strength, or even to find marriage partners, for the line between god and giant was often blurred. This is where we find two of the most iconic and paradoxical figures in all of Norse myth. The first is Loki, the infamous trickster. Though he lived among the Aesir in Asgard and was Odin's blood brother, Loki was by birth a giant from Jotunheim. He embodies the chaotic and unpredictable nature of his homeland, a force of cunning and change that could both help and hinder the gods, often within the same story. His presence in Asgard was a constant reminder that order can never fully purge the chaos from which it sprang. The other is the wise giant Mimir, the guardian of a sacred well of knowledge located beneath one of the roots of the world tree, Yggdrasil. His well contained waters of such profound wisdom that Odin, the All-Father himself, sacrificed one of his own eyes for a single drink from it. Mimir represents the deep, ancient knowledge that can be found only within the heart of chaos itself. He was not a mindless brute, but a being of immense intellect and foresight, proving that Jotunheim was not merely a land of monsters, but a source of essential, if dangerous, truths. So why did the Norse imagine a world so hostile yet so necessary? Jotunheim was the crucible that forged the gods' strength and wisdom. Without the threat of the giants, the walls of Asgard would have no purpose. Without the wisdom of Mimir, Odin would be blind in a different way. This realm forces us to ask whether our own attempts to build a safe, ordered world can ever truly succeed if we completely cut ourselves off from the wild, unpredictable, and ancient forces that first shaped us. Yet the cosmic struggle between order and chaos was not the only conflict that shaped the Norse heavens. A far more intimate war was once fought between two families of gods themselves. Across a great divide from the warrior halls of Asgard lay Vanaheim, the serene and fertile homeland of the Vanir. These gods were not rulers of battle and death, but masters of a different kind of power. They commanded the wind that filled the sails, the soil that sprouted the grain, and the deep, earthy magic of Seda, a form of sorcery that could see the future and influence fate. Where the Aesir were like kings and generals, the Vanir were the wise farmers and mystics, their power flowing from the cycles of nature itself. This fundamental difference in their very essence eventually erupted into a terrible and exhausting war. The Aesir, led by Odin, clashed with the Vanir, and for a long time neither side could gain a decisive victory. The conflict was so evenly matched and so destructive that both tribes realized a continued war would only lead to mutual ruin. And so they did something remarkably pragmatic for gods. They chose peace. To seal their truce, they did not simply exchange promises, they exchanged people. The two tribes sent hostages to live among each other, a profound act of trust and integration. The most famous of these exchanges sent the Vanir gods Njord and his twin children, the radiant Freya and the powerful Freyja, to live in Asgard. In return, the Aesir sent Honir, a god known for his imposing presence, and the wise Mimir to live among the Vanir. This exchange forever changed the Norse pantheon. Freya and Freyja brought the vital magic of the Vanir with them, teaching the Aesir the arts of Seda. Freyja, in particular, became one of the most revered goddesses, a mistress of love, war, and magic, who even received half of the warriors slain in battle to dwell in her own hall, Sessrumnir. The war and its peaceful resolution reveal a profound understanding of balance. It was not enough to have the strength of the Aesir or the fertility of the Vanir alone. A complete world needed both the power to defend life and the magic to create it. This union of spear and harvest, of prophecy and power, forged the pantheon we know today, a family of gods who were stronger together than they ever were apart. Deep beneath the roots of the World Tree, in a realm of shadow and echoing hammer strokes, the dwarves shaped the destiny of the gods. This is Svartalfheim, also known as Nidavellir, a sprawling subterranean kingdom of magnificent caves and volcanic forges. If Alfheim was a realm of light and life, this was its necessary counterpart, a world of earth, metal, and immense patient skill. Here, the master smiths of Norse mythology worked their craft, their fires illuminating vast, glittering caverns. These were not the gentle light elves, but beings of immense strength and cunning, who understood the secrets locked within stone and ore. Their greatest legacy was the creation of the most powerful artifacts in all the cosmos, treasures that would become central to the very survival of Asgard. It was in these deep forges that the dwarf brothers Brokkr and Eitri famously crafted Thor's mighty hammer, Mjolnir. The story of its creation is a tale of divine trickery and immense pressure. Loki, ever the provocateur, had wagered his own head that the brothers could not create gifts more wonderful than those made by the sons of Ivaldi. As Brokkr worked the bellows, a fly, which was Loki in disguise, bit him fiercely on the eyelid to disrupt his rhythm. Despite the pain and the blood obscuring his vision, Brokkr never let the fire falter, and Eitri pulled from the forge a hammer of such perfect power and balance that it would never miss its target and would always return to Thor's hand. This single object became the primary defense of both gods and humanity against the chaotic giants of Jotunheim. But Mjolnir was not their only masterpiece. From these same dark forges came Odin's magical spear, Gungnir, a weapon that could never be parried in battle and to which all oaths sworn upon it were eternally binding. They also created Sif's golden hair, a replacement for the locks Loki had cruelly sheared, and Freya's enchanted ship, Skidbladnir, which could fold small enough to fit in a pocket yet carry all the gods across the seas. The dwarves were the indispensable engineers of the Norse cosmos. Their realm was one of practical magic, where raw material was transformed into divine purpose. Their creations were not merely beautiful, they were functional, powerful, and utterly necessary for maintaining the delicate balance of the 9 worlds. Why did the gods, for all their power, not simply create these objects themselves? Perhaps because the kind of genius required to bind magic into metal, to impose a perfect, unbreakable form onto the chaos of elemental forces, was a power that belonged solely to the patient, brilliant minds of the deep earth. The very structure of the cosmos, from the walls of Asgard to the weapons that defended it, relied on the labor of these beings who worked in the dark, their contributions as fundamental to the myth as the gods who wielded them. The dwarves' forges crafted tools for a world of struggle and time, but Celtic mythology dreamed of a place where such struggles were utterly forgotten. Tyr na en Og, the land of youth, was an island paradise veiled by mist and magic, a realm of eternal summer where sorrow, sickness, and old age were unknown. Its beauty was said to be beyond mortal comprehension, with forests in perpetual blossom and meadows sweet with the sound of music. This was not a land for the dead, but for the ever-living, a place of feasting, love, and endless joy, accessible only through ancient burial mounds known as Shia, or by a direct invitation from the Aos, the powerful fairy folk. The most famous journey to this timeless realm belongs to the hero Oisin, son of the legendary warrior Fionn mac Cumhaill. While hunting with his companions, Oisin encountered Niamh of the golden hair, a princess of Tyr na en Og who had ridden across the waves on a white steed. She invited him to return with her to her father's kingdom, promising him love and immortality. Smitten, Oisin climbed onto her horse and they rode across the sea, arriving in a world of such splendor that all memory of Ireland began to fade from his heart. For what felt like 3 blissful weeks, Oisin lived with Niamh in perfect happiness, feasting and exploring the wonders of the ageless land. Yet a quiet longing for his home and his father's people began to grow in him. He asked Niamh if he could return to Ireland for a brief visit. She agreed, but gave him a grave warning. He must not let his feet touch the soil of mortal earth, for if he did, the centuries he had avoided would crash down upon him all at once. She provided him with a magical white horse, which would keep him safe as long as he remained in the saddle. Oisin returned to Ireland, but the world he found was utterly changed. The great fortress of his father, Fionn mac Cumhaill, was a crumbling ruin overgrown with moss. The people he met seemed small and strange, and when he spoke of the Fianna, his mighty warrior band, they only knew them as figures from ancient legends. While traveling, he saw a group of men struggling to lift a massive stone. Leaning down from his saddle to help them, his grip slipped and he tumbled to the ground. The moment he touched the earth, the magic of Tyr na en Og shattered. The weight of 300 years instantly seized him, transforming the youthful hero into a withered, blind old man. The white horse vanished, and Oisin was left alone in a country that was no longer his own. The story of Oisin is one of the most poignant in all mythology, a heartbreaking exploration of the trade-off between timeless joy and the tangible, fleeting world we call home. It asks a devastating question: is an eternity of perfect happiness worth the price of losing everything and everyone you ever loved? And what does it truly mean to go home, if home is a place that exists only in memory? That same Celtic longing for a world beyond our own took a different form in the mists of Wales. Annwn was not an island across the sea, but an otherworld that seemed to exist just a breath away from the mortal realm. Described in the ancient tales of the Mabinogion, this was a kingdom of stunning beauty and eternal feasting, a land where sickness and decay held no power. It was ruled by a solemn and powerful figure, King Avalon, who commanded the mysteries of life and death from his shimmering court. Avalon defies simple categorization. It was sometimes seen as a Celtic underworld, a destination for the dead, yet it was also a vibrant fairy realm brimming with magic and vitality, a place one could physically journey to and return from forever changed. Its nature is revealed most clearly through the extraordinary story of Pwyll, Prince of Dyfed. While hunting in his own lands, Pwyll made a grave mistake. He set his hounds upon a stag that had already been brought down by the pack of a strange, otherworldly hunter. This hunter was none other than King Avalon himself. Instead of reacting with anger, Avalon offered Pwyll a chance at redemption through a most peculiar alliance. He proposed that they exchange forms and kingdoms for the span of 1 year. Pwyll would go to Avalon and rule as King Avalon, while Avalon would take Pwyll's place in Dyfed. There was, however, one crucial condition. At the end of the year, Pwyll was to confront Avalon's greatest enemy, the king of another realm, Halfdan. Pwyll was to face Halfdan in single combat, and he was allowed only one blow. If he struck a second time, Halfdan would simply rise again, stronger than before. Pwyll agreed, and for a year he lived as the Lord of Avalon, experiencing its wonders and ruling with justice and wisdom. When the time came for the duel, he faced Halfdan and struck him a single, crippling blow. As Halfdan lay wounded, he begged Pwyll to finish him, to land the second strike that would, in fact, be his salvation. Pwyll, remembering his oath, resisted the temptation. He simply stood his ground, and Halfdan faded away, his power broken. This act of restraint cemented a lifelong friendship between Pwyll and Avalon, and it earned Pwyll the title Pendefig Dyfed, the head of Dyfed, forever linking his earthly reign to the magic of the otherworld. The story is far more than a simple adventure. It paints Avalon not as a place of terror, but as a realm of profound tests and sacred oaths. Pwyll's success came not from brute force, but from his ability to listen, to keep his word, and to understand the subtle, magical laws that govern this different reality. His journey shows that the boundary between our world and the other world is not a wall, but a veil, one that can be crossed by those who possess both courage and integrity. So what kind of place was Avalon truly? It was a realm where a single, disciplined choice could forge a destiny, a kingdom of the dead that was, paradoxically, teeming with a more intense form of life. It asks us what tests we might face if we ever stepped across that threshold, and whether we would have the wisdom to understand the rules of a world not our own. Another sea voyage leads to a plain of pure delight. The Irish myths speak of Mag Mell, a name that translates directly as the Plain of Joy. This was not an island veiled in mist like Tir na and Og, but a vast, radiant land said to exist either beneath the ocean waves or far across the western horizon. Reaching it was never a matter of simple navigation. It required a hazardous journey, a test of will where heroes had to cross treacherous waters or be summoned by the whims of the otherworld itself. The master of this domain was the great sea god Manannán mac Lir, a figure cloaked in mystery and power. He was the guardian of the veil between worlds, often seen riding his chariot across the sea, which mortals perceived as white-capped waves. His presence defined Mag Mell as a place of profound magic and divine authority, a paradise earned through peril. Within its borders, time held no sway. The land was a perpetual feast of music, storytelling, and athletic games, where 100 years could feel like a single, perfect afternoon. There was no sickness, no old age, and no shadow of sorrow. The trees were forever heavy with fruit, and the very air tasted of honey and peace. This was a realm of everlasting happiness, a divine reward for those chosen by the gods or brave enough to answer its call. But the journey to such a place was as much a part of its myth as the destination itself. Why would the stories insist on such a dangerous passage to a land of pure joy? Perhaps because an unearned paradise holds little meaning. the struggle across the sea served as a filter, ensuring that only those with true courage or a destined heart could experience a bliss that would otherwise be taken for granted. Mag-Mel represents the ultimate prize, a happiness so complete that it is worth any voyage, any trial, to finally walk upon its golden plains. Death was not an end, but a long, dark journey to a kingdom of shadows. The ancient Greeks and Romans envisioned the afterlife as a vast, subterranean realm ruled by the stern god Hades and his queen Persephone. This was not a place of simple reward or punishment, but a complex world with its own geography and bureaucracy, a final destination that reflected the full spectrum of a human life. The voyage began the moment a soul left its body. It had to find its way to the entrance of the underworld, typically imagined as a cave or a deep fissure in the earth. There, on the banks of the river Styx, the first and most critical challenge awaited. This was the spectral ferryman Charon, who rowed his battered skiff across the black, sluggish waters. His price for passage was a single coin, an obol, which loving relatives would place in the mouth of the deceased before burial. Without this coin, the soul was doomed to wander the misty, desolate shore for 100 years, a forgotten ghost with no place to rest. This single detail reveals how deeply the practicalities of death were woven into the fabric of daily life, a final act of care that ensured a loved one's peaceful transition. Once Charon accepted the coin and the soul boarded his ferry, the journey across the Styx was a one-way trip into eternity. On the far shore, a second guardian stood watch. This was Cerberus, the monstrous, three-headed hound with a serpent for a tail. His role was not to prevent entry, but to ensure that no one who entered the land of the dead could ever leave. His slavering jaws and piercing bark were the final barrier between the living world and the kingdom of the deceased. Past this fearsome creature, the soul would enter the fields of asphodel. This was the underworld's great grey plain, a misty expanse where the vast majority of souls resided for eternity. Here, the ordinary people, those who had lived lives of neither great virtue nor glaring wickedness, passed their time as anonymous whispering shades. They drifted through a featureless landscape, their memories of life faded almost to nothing, experiencing neither pain nor joy, but a perpetual, dull neutrality. It was a bleak reflection of the Greek view of an average existence, a life that simply ended without leaving a significant mark. But the underworld was divided, and other paths branched away from this grey field. To the right lay a radiant, sun-drenched paradise, the Elysian Fields. This was the glorious reward for heroes, the virtuous, and those blessed by the gods. Here, the air was always sweet, and the inhabitants enjoyed a life of peaceful leisure, engaging in music, athletic games, and conversation, forever free from the toil and sorrow of the world above. In some later traditions, particularly Roman, the most distinguished souls in Elysium were even offered a chance at reincarnation, to drink from the river Lethe and be reborn, their memories washed clean for a new life. And then there was the path to the left, a descent into a deep abyss of torment. This was Tartarus, a prison as far beneath the earth was beneath the sky. Encircled by a wall of bronze and a raging river of fire, the Phlegethon, it served as the divine dungeon for the gods' most hated enemies. Here, the great rebels and sinners faced their eternal, symbolic punishments. Sisyphus, who had cheated death twice, was forever pushing a boulder up a hill only for it to roll back down just before the summit. Tantalus, who had served his own son as a meal to the gods, stood in a pool of water that receded when he tried to drink, with fruit-laden branches swaying just beyond his grasp. These were not merely torments of pain, but of infinite frustration, designed to reflect the specific nature of their crimes against the divine order. This intricate map of the afterlife was more than just a collection of scary stories. It was a profound moral and philosophical system, a way for an ancient culture to grapple with the biggest questions of all. What does a life well lived truly mean, and what justice awaits us after our final breath? The journey through Hades suggests that our actions echo long after we are gone, and that death itself may be the ultimate judge of the lives we chose to lead. A painted papyrus scroll could mean the difference between eternal life and utter annihilation. For the ancient Egyptians, the afterlife was not a single destination, but a treacherous 12-hour journey through a dark and monstrous realm known as the Duat. This was the nightly path of the sun god Ra, whose bark sailed through this subterranean world from sunset to sunrise, and it was the same perilous route every human soul had to travel after death. The Duat was a landscape of pure nightmare, populated by grotesque demons with knives for fingers and twisted, animalistic faces. The soul had to navigate lakes of fire, evade serpentine monsters like the apocalyptic Apep, and answer to a host of hostile gatekeepers, each demanding the correct password or magical spell for passage. Success depended entirely on preparation. This is why the Book of the Dead, or as the Egyptians called it, the Book of Coming Forth by Day, was so vital. It was not a holy text of commandments, but a practical survival guide for the deceased, filled with precise incantations, maps, and warnings to be buried with the mummy. One spell might give the soul the power to transform into a heron to escape a trap, while another provided the exact words to pacify a crocodile-headed demon. The ultimate goal was not to reach a paradise, but to survive the gauntlet and stand in the magnificent Hall of Two Truths. Here, in the final and most dramatic test, the heart of the deceased was placed on a golden scale and weighed against the feather of Mat, the goddess of truth and cosmic order. If the heart, heavy with sin, outweighed the feather, it would be devoured by the terrifying goddess Ammit, a creature part lion, part hippo, and part crocodile, resulting in a second, final death that erased the soul from existence. But if the heart was as light as the feather, the soul would be declared true of voice and welcomed by the god Osiris into the lush, eternal field of reeds. This entire cosmic process mirrored the Egyptian view of their own world, where the sun's daily rebirth was a constant victory over chaos. The journey through the Duat was the ultimate expression of this belief, transforming death from an end into the most dangerous and important voyage a person would ever undertake. A single poem could build a palace more enduring than any stone. The name Xanadu echoes with the chime of dreamlike beauty, a place suspended between history and pure fantasy. This was the summer capital of the Mongol Emperor Kublai Khan, the sprawling complex of Shangdu north of the Great Wall. In reality, it was a magnificent administrative center, a testament to the power and reach of the Yuan dynasty, where the ruler could oversee his vast territories and enjoy the cooler northern air. Its palace halls and surrounding grasslands were a hub of imperial life, a real place where policy was decided and armies were marshaled. But that is not the Xanadu that captured the world's imagination. That Xanadu was born from a fragment of a dream, penned by the English poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge in 1797. He claimed to have fallen into an opium-induced slumber while reading a book about the Khan's palace, and upon waking, he scrambled to write down the lines that had flowed through his mind. The result was his unfinished poem, Kubla Khan, a work that begins with a decree of pure creation. In Xanadu did Kubla Khan a stately pleasure dome decree. With those words, the historical Shangdu was forever transformed. Coleridge's Xanadu is a place of violent, natural beauty, where a sacred river bursts from a chasm to run through caverns measureless to man down to a sunless sea. At its heart stands that pleasure dome, a vision of perfect, impossible architecture with sunny domes and caves of ice. It is a world of contrasts, both fertile and savage, built over an abyss of primal chaos. The poem created a mythical quality that the real location never possessed for those who lived there. For the Western imagination, Xanadu became the ultimate symbol of the exotic and luxurious Orient, a land of untold wealth and sensual pleasure, a vision so potent it overshadowed the historical truth. The real Shangdu was eventually abandoned and fell into ruin, its stones reclaimed by the earth, but the mythical Xanadu, the one built from words and dreams, has never crumbled. It lives on in our language, a byword for any place of idyllic beauty and magnificent splendor. This raises a profound question about the power of art. Can a poem born from a drugged sleep create a realm more real and lasting than the empire that inspired it? The stones of the Khan are dust, but his pleasure dome still stands perfect and unaging in the palace of the mind. Deep within the sacred texts of Tibetan Buddhism lies a prophecy of a sanctuary untouched by time. This is Shambhala, a hidden kingdom encircled by a ring of snowy peaks, where wisdom and compassion are the only laws. Its people live in perfect harmony, guided by a lineage of enlightened kings, and its capital, Kalapa, is said to be a city of such architectural and spiritual splendor that it defies mortal imagination. Unlike the lost realms of Atlantis or Mu, Shambhala is not a relic of the past, but a living reality waiting for its moment. It is described in the ancient Kalachakra Tantra, a profound teaching on cycles of time, not as a place for escape, but as a fortress of spiritual power that will one day engage with our world in its darkest hour. The prophecy tells of a future time when ideologies of greed and hatred will engulf the earth. It is then that the 25th king of Shambhala, a ruler named Rudra Kakran, will ride forth from his hidden valley with a vast army to confront the destructive forces. This will not be a war of conventional weapons, but a final, cosmic battle against the inner and outer forces of ignorance. The victory of Shambhala will herald a new golden age, a period of global peace and enlightenment. This vision has captivated esoteric seekers for centuries, from Tibetan lamas to figures like the Russian mystic Nicholas Roerich, who searched for its traces in the high passes of the Altai Mountains. The central, beautiful paradox of Shambhala is its nature. It is described as a physical place, a land with rivers and mountains that some believe exists in the remote reaches of Central Asia, perhaps in the Kunlun Mountains or the Gobi Desert. Yet it is simultaneously a pure land, a spiritual dimension that can only be perceived by those with a purified mind and a compassionate heart. This duality makes the search for Shambhala a deeply personal journey. You cannot simply follow a map to its borders, you must follow a path of inner transformation. The kingdom reveals itself not to the most ambitious explorer, but to the most devoted student. So what are we to make of this legendary realm? Is it a literal army waiting in a hidden valley, or is it a powerful metaphor for the enlightened potential that sleeps within each of us, a collective force of goodness that will awaken when the world needs it most? Perhaps the true location of Shambhala is not on any map, but in the human capacity to cultivate peace, ready to emerge and conquer the darkness when the time is right. A golden rumor can build cities in the desert air. The legend of the 7 cities of Cibola was born from a potent mixture of wishful thinking and a single, misunderstood story. After witnessing the staggering wealth of the Aztec and Inca empires to the south, Spanish conquistadors in New Spain were primed to believe that another treasure-filled civilization lay just beyond the northern horizon. Their conviction was given a name by a shipwrecked explorer, Alvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca. After 8 years of wandering across the American Southwest, he and his 3 companions finally stumbled upon a Spanish slave hunting party. They brought back tales of hearing from indigenous peoples about great, multi-storied towns built of stone. The Spanish viceroy, Antonio de Mendoza, desperate to claim such riches for himself, dispatched a Franciscan friar, Marcos de Niza, to investigate. Friar Marcos returned with a report that would ignite a frenzy. He claimed to have seen, from a distant mountain pass, one of the 7 cities. He described it as larger than Mexico City, a place where the very commoners ate from golden plates and emeralds were as common as pebbles. He named it Cibola. His account was almost certainly an exaggeration, a shimmering mirage of desire projected onto a real, but far more modest, Pueblo settlement. Yet it was enough to launch one of the most ambitious and brutal expeditions in North American history. In 1540, Francisco Vázquez de Coronado set out with a massive force of over 300 Spanish soldiers, hundreds of indigenous allies, and a vast herd of livestock, all marching north under the banner of gold and God. For months they pushed deeper into the arid landscapes of what is now Arizona and New Mexico, their dreams of wealth fueling them through a punishing journey. Finally, they reached the first of the fabled cities. It was not a metropolis of gold, but the Zuni Pueblo of Huaca, a formidable adobe complex that must have looked utterly alien to the Europeans. When the Zuni defenders refused them entry, Coronado ordered an attack. The Spanish steel and cavalry overwhelmed the Pueblo's defenders, and the conquistadors poured into the city, not to plunder gold, but to seize its meager stores of food and supplies. They found no glittering treasures, only corn, beans, and turquoise. The great 7 cities of gold were nothing more than the ancient, sophisticated, but decidedly earthen pueblos of the Zuni and Hopi peoples. Coronado, unwilling to admit total failure, pressed on for 2 more years, his expedition splintering into smaller groups that reached as far as the Grand Canyon and the vast plains of Kansas, always chasing whispers of a next great city called Quivira. They found only Native American villages living in harmony with a land that offered sustenance, but not the gold they so desperately craved. The entire costly quest ended in humiliating failure, a testament to the destructive power of a legend. The real treasure was not gold, but the profound cultural landscape they had blindly marched through, a world of rich traditions and complex societies that they were entirely unprepared to see. The myth of Cibola forces us to ask a difficult question. When we are blinded by the reflection of what we desire, what magnificent realities are we trampling underfoot in our rush to find it? The dream of gold often obscures a deeper, more personal hunger, the desire to turn back time itself. This longing gave rise to one of history's most enduring quests, the search for the fountain of youth. While the Spanish explorer Juan Ponce de Leon is famously, and perhaps unfairly, linked to this hunt in Florida, the legend's waters run much deeper. Its source can be traced to the very same letter that promised Europe a savior in Prester John. Within that fantastical document, the mythical king described a fountain of incredible virtue, a spring that could restore a man's youth if he bathed in it. This idea did not originate with Prester John either. It echoes ancient stories found across cultures, from the magical well of the Celtic god Dian, Sate, to the water of life in Mesopotamian and biblical traditions, a divine liquid that could heal any wound and even raise the dead. These early myths established a powerful archetype, a sacred source that could reverse the most fundamental law of nature, the slow decay of the body. When tales of the New World began to filter back to Europe, brimming with descriptions of strange landscapes and mysterious waters, this ancient archetype found a new map. The lush, unfamiliar peninsula of Florida, with its countless freshwater springs emerging crystal clear from the earth, seemed like the perfect setting for such a miracle. The connection to Ponce de Leon was cemented by later historians, who claimed the aging conquistador was actively seeking the fountain during his expeditions in the early 1500s. The story goes that he had heard of its powers from the indigenous people of Puerto Rico, who spoke of a legendary land called Bimini where such a spring flowed. While modern scholars largely dismiss this as a colorful fiction added to his biography long after his death, the association is now inseparable from the myth. The truth is, Ponce de Leon was almost certainly motivated by the same desires as his peers: land, gold, and titles. Yet his name is forever tied to the fountain because the legend speaks to a fear far more universal than the lust for wealth. It is the fear of growing old, weak, and irrelevant. The fountain of youth is not really about water, it is about the human refusal to accept our own mortality. Why did this particular story attach itself so firmly to the New World? perhaps because these new lands represented a literal clean slate, a place where the rules of the old world might not apply, and where the ancient dreams of every civilization could at last be waiting just beyond the next river. Every bubbling spring in Florida became a potential site of the miracle, transforming a geographical exploration into the most personal of pilgrimages. In the end, Ponce de Leon found no magical waters, only a mortal wound from a poisoned arrow. But the legend he inadvertently championed would outlive him by centuries, a testament to the fact that the most powerful quests are not for what we can hold in our hands, but for what we feel slipping through our fingers with every passing day. For the pharaohs of Egypt, one land shimmered above all others as a source of divine wealth. This was Punt, a place the Egyptians called the Land of God, a trading partner so vital and exotic that its memory was carved into temple walls for eternity. Imagine a kingdom that supplied the very materials for ritual and royalty. From Punt came fragrant frankincense and myrrh, resins that were burned in temples to carry prayers to the gods, their smoke perfuming the halls of power. It was the source of ebony and ivory, of leopard skins and live baboons, and of the gold that sheathed the tombs of kings. This was not a mythical paradise of legend, but a very real, functioning civilization with which Egypt maintained a bustling trade for over 1,000 years. The most famous account of this relationship is the grand expedition commissioned by Queen Hatshepsut in the 15th century before the Common Era. She had the entire journey documented in magnificent reliefs on her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari. These carvings show massive Egyptian ships setting sail down the Red Sea, their destination a land of strange and wonderful sights. They depict the Puntites themselves, living in beehive-shaped huts raised on stilts above the ground, their leader a strikingly large and curvaceous woman, Queen Atii, who ruled alongside her husband. The carvings show the loading of the ships, their decks piled high with frankincense trees, their roots carefully balled in baskets for the long voyage home to be replanted in the temple gardens of Egypt. This was not a raid or a conquest, but a sophisticated trade mission between two established powers, a diplomatic and commercial triumph worthy of being immortalized in stone. Yet for all this detailed evidence, a single, profound question remains. Where was Punt? The ancient Egyptians wrote extensively about the products of Punt and the voyages to reach it, but they never left a clear modern-day map. The descriptions point generally south and east, accessible via the Red Sea. This has led to a great scholarly debate that has lasted for more than a century. One major theory places Punt firmly in the Horn of Africa, in the region that is now Eritrea, eastern Ethiopia, and Djibouti. This area is a known source of frankincense and myrrh, and the wildlife depicted, like baboons and leopards, fits the African ecosystem perfectly. The portrayal of the Puntite village with stilt houses suggests a coastal mangrove environment, which is found along parts of the African Red Sea coast. The other prominent theory argues for a location on the southern Arabian Peninsula, in modern-day Yemen or Oman. This region, known in antiquity as Arabia Felix, was famously rich in the very same aromatic resins that Egypt prized. The ancient kingdoms of this area, like Saba, the land of the biblical queen of Sheba, were legendary for their wealth in incense. Could the land of Punt and the land of Sheba have been one and the same? The debate continues because the evidence is tantalizingly ambiguous. Some analyses of the mummified baboons brought from Punt and found in Egyptian tombs suggest their isotopic signatures match animals from Eritrea and Ethiopia, lending weight to the African hypothesis. Yet other trade goods and linguistic clues keep the Arabian possibility alive. The mystery of Punt's location is more than a simple geographical puzzle. It forces us to reconsider the scale and complexity of ancient trade networks. These were not primitive exchanges between neighbors, but globalized systems spanning vast bodies of water. The Egyptians were sailing across the Red Sea and down the coast, navigating treacherous waters to establish a supply chain for the most precious commodities of their world. The enduring search for Punt shows us that even the most well-documented ancient relationships can dissolve into mystery, leaving us to piece together a map of a lost world from the fragments of incense and gold it left behind. Far to the north, where the icy breath of Boreas the wind god originated, Greek poets spoke of a realm untouched by his chilling gales. This was Hyperborea, the land beyond the north wind, a paradise of perpetual sunshine and gentle warmth. In this golden land, a race of giants known as the Hyperboreans lived in perfect peace and harmony, their lives a continuous festival of music and dance. They were a people blessed by the god Apollo, who was said to visit them regularly during the winter months, drawn by their piety and joyful existence. Their society knew no sickness, no old age, and no strife, a stark contrast to the turbulent city-states of ancient Greece. Death for them was not a thing to be feared, but a gentle conclusion to a life of utter fulfillment, a quiet laying down of the body when one had savored every possible delight. The poet Pindar described it as a place where the muse was always present, and no disease or bitter old age disturbed the peaceful existence of this sacred race. The very name Hyperborea was not just a geographical label, but a promise of a life lived in perfect alignment with the divine. How could such a land exist in a world of harsh winters and fleeting summers? The Greeks rationalized its perpetual sunshine by placing it in the extreme north, where the midnight sun of the Arctic summer could be imagined as a permanent state. This was a world built on the logic of myth, where the greatest blessings were found not in the familiar south, but in the most remote and inaccessible reaches of the earth. The path to this paradise was impossible for ordinary mortals to traverse, a journey blocked by both the physical barrier of the freezing north wind and a metaphysical barrier of worthiness. One could not simply sail to Hyperborea, one had to be invited by the gods. This idea of a hidden northern utopia did not vanish with the classical world. Centuries later, the myth was resurrected and twisted to serve new ideologies. In the 19th and 20th centuries, various mystical and nationalist groups, particularly in Germany, seized upon Hyperborea. They detached it from its Greek origins and reimagined it as the ancient, lost homeland of the so-called Aryan race, a pure, white civilization of supermen from which all culture and nobility had supposedly sprung. This was a profound and dangerous corruption of the original myth. The Greek Hyperborea was a land defined by its spiritual harmony and connection to Apollo, the god of light and reason. The nationalist version replaced this spiritual purity with a brutal and exclusionary focus on racial purity, transforming a poetic vision of peace into a weapon of hatred. The journey of this myth, from a land of peaceful giants to a supposed birthplace of racial supremacy, reveals a chilling truth about the power of these ancient stories. They are not inert relics, but living narratives that can be reshaped to reflect our highest ideals or our darkest prejudices. What does it say about us that a legend of perfect harmony could be so easily warped into a symbol of division? The original Hyperborea remains a beautiful, elusive dream, a reminder that our search for paradise is often a search for the best within ourselves, a light that some would tragically try to claim for themselves alone. The ancient world's maps held a blank space at their northern edge, a final frontier labeled simply Thule. The Greek explorer Pytheas was the first to bring back tales of this land in the 4th century before the Common Era, claiming to have sailed for 6 days from Britain into a frozen sea where the sun barely set in summer and the very ocean congealed into a slushy mass. He described a place where earth, sea, and air seemed to merge into one substance, a world of raw elemental power at the very limit of the known. Later Roman writers like Tacitus and Virgil latched onto this idea, using Thule as a poetic shorthand for the ultimate edge of civilization, the last outpost before the map dissolved into pure myth. Was it the Shetland Islands, the coast of Norway, or was it Iceland, with its volcanic fires and ice fields that perfectly matched the ancient descriptions of a land of contradictions? The true identity of the original Thule remains one of geography's great cold cases, but its symbolic power proved far more enduring than its coordinates. The phrase Ultima Thule, the farthest Thule, entered the lexicon as a term for any unreachable goal, a place of mystery just beyond the horizon of human knowledge. This dream of a primordial northern homeland, however, would be twisted into a nightmare. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, a fringe occult movement known as the Thule Society emerged in Germany. They hijacked the classical myth, weaving it into a bizarre and dangerous pseudo-history. They claimed Thule was not merely a northern island, but the lost Arctic home of a superhuman Aryan race, a Hyperborean paradise whose advanced technology was the true source of all ancient civilizations. This mystical nonsense sought to provide a mythical foundation for a political ideology of racial purity and supremacy. The Thule Society's insignia, interestingly, featured a dagger superimposed over a swastika, and several of its members would become early architects of the Nazi Party. The romantic, distant Thule of the ancients was forcibly reborn as a racist utopia, a spiritual justification for unimaginable horror. How does a geographical mystery transform into a weapon? The story of Thule is a stark lesson in how the human hunger for a glorious past can be poisoned, how the blank spaces on our maps are so often filled not just with our dreams but with our darkest desires. The poets of antiquity spoke of a time before time, a perfect beginning when the world was new. In his epic works and days, the Greek poet Hesiod described a succession of ages, each named for a metal, and the very first was the Golden Age. This was an era of eternal spring, when the earth gave forth its bounty freely without the need for plows or toil. Humanity lived in peaceful communion with the gods, their hearts untouched by greed, malice, or the weary burden of old age. Death, when it finally came, was as gentle as a sleep, and the spirits of these first people were said to remain on earth as benevolent guardians. Centuries later, the Roman poet Ovid would echo this vision in his Metamorphoses, painting a picture of a world that knew no laws, for the simple reason that no one ever dreamed of breaking them. Justice and righteousness were innate, woven into the very fabric of life itself. This was not a paradise built by human hands, but a default setting for creation, a flawless state from which all subsequent history has been a long, slow decline into the harsh iron age of struggle and strife we inhabit today. This powerful narrative of a lost golden age is not unique to the Greco-Roman world. It is a universal human refrain, a foundational memory that appears in countless cultures. The Hindus speak of the Satya Yuga, an age of truth when humanity was virtuous and the lifespan was 4,000 years. In Zoroastrian tradition, the first of 4 world ages was a time of perfect goodness under the rule of the creator, Ahura Mazda. Chinese philosophy, too, venerates a distant past where sage kings ruled with such benevolence that society was perfectly harmonious. Even the Abrahamic story of the Garden of Eden, though focused on a single couple, carries the same core idea of an original state of innocence and direct connection to the divine, a state shattered by a single act of disobedience. Why does this specific myth appear with such consistency across the globe? It seems to answer a profound and deeply human question. If our present world is so full of hardship, injustice, and suffering, how did it come to be this way? The myth of the Golden Age provides a comforting, if melancholy, explanation. We were not made for this. Our true home is a memory of a better world, a primordial perfection from which we have been exiled not by a change in the weather, but by a change in our own hearts. It suggests that our deepest longing for peace, for fairness, for a world without pain, is not a naive fantasy, but a genetic memory of a reality we once possessed. This collective nostalgia for a time we never knew shapes our art, our religions, and our politics, forever driving us to rebuild a paradise we can only faintly recall. A whisper of gold traveled on the icy wind blowing down from Canada's north. Decades after the Spanish chased their golden phantoms in the American Southwest, a similar dream took root in the heart of New France, fueled by a story from an entirely different world. The French explorer Jacques Cartier, on his second voyage up the St. Lawrence River in 1535, encountered a powerful Iroquois chief named Donnacona. After a period of wary exchange, the chief began to speak of a wondrous kingdom far to the northwest, a land his people called Saguenay. The tales he spun were breathtaking. He described a realm of immense wealth where the people possessed vast quantities of gold and rubies and lived in great cities. Most startling of all, he claimed the inhabitants were fair-skinned, a race of white men who dressed in woolen clothes. For Cartier and his European patrons, this was not just a native legend, it was a recognizable fantasy. It was as if a piece of their own mythology, a story of a lost white tribe or a northern El Dorado, had been miraculously transplanted onto the North American map. The kingdom of Saguenay became an immediate obsession, a justification for further exploration and the costly work of colonization. The following year, Cartier returned, and in a move that reveals the dark undercurrent of this quest, he seized Chief Donnacona and several of his tribesmen. He transported them across the Atlantic to the court of King Francis I of France, where they were forced to repeat their stories of the rich kingdom to the eager monarch. Donnacona never saw his homeland again, dying in France a few years later. His coerced testimony, however, lent a cruel legitimacy to the myth, ensuring that the search for Saguenay would continue for decades. What were these Iroquoian stories really describing? Modern scholars suggest several fascinating possibilities. The tales of Great Lakes and rivers to the west could have been accounts of the Great Lakes Basin passed along trade routes. The mention of light-skinned people might have referred to the neighboring Algonquian tribes, who are often taller and lighter complexioned than the Iroquoians. The gold could have been a misinterpretation of deposits of copper, a metal highly valued by indigenous cultures for tools and ceremonial objects, which gleams with a similar sun-like hue. The rubies might have been garnets or other red-hued stones found in the Canadian Shield. The kingdom of Saguenay, therefore, stands as a profound example of cross-cultural misunderstanding. The Iroquoians were likely sharing their geographical and trade knowledge, a map of their known world and its resources. The French, their minds preconditioned by European legends of Prester John and the Seven Cities, heard only what they wanted to hear, a confirmation that the New World held the same old dreams of instant wealth. They were not listening to understand the land, they were listening for an echo of their own desires. The phantom of Saguenay slowly faded as French explorers pushed further inland and found not a kingdom of white men in woolen clothes, but the vibrant, complex, and very real indigenous civilizations of the continental interior. The legend died when the map was finally filled with truth, a truth that had been there all along, waiting to be heard for what it was and not for what men wished it to be. Bells still ring from another sunken city, this one lying closer to home. Off the jagged coast of Cornwall, a kingdom of legend sleeps beneath the grey Atlantic waves. This is Lyoness, the final and perhaps most poignant of the lost Arthurian realms. It was a land of fine cities and 140 churches, a fertile plain that once stretched from the mainland far out to sea, connecting Cornwall to the Isles of Scilly. The people of Lyoness were said to be great horsemen and noble knights, their world deeply woven into the fabric of Camelot's glory. But its most enduring connection is to a story of love and ruin, the tragic romance of Tristan and Isolde. It was from the court of Lyoness that the knight Tristan first set sail for Ireland, a voyage that would lead him to a forbidden love potion and a fate intertwined with Isolde, the wife of his uncle, King Mark of Cornwall. Their ill-fated passion cast a long shadow over the land itself, as if the kingdom's destiny was tied to the heartbreaking choices of its most famous son. The end came not with a slow erosion, but in a single, violent night. A tremendous storm gathered over the sea, and without warning, the ocean surged inland. The waves did not recede. They kept coming, swallowing fields, forests, and towns in one relentless, roaring tide. By morning, the entire kingdom was gone, leaving only the highest peaks of its hills visible above the water, which we now know as the Scilly Isles. Local fishermen still tell of hearing the ghostly chimes of Lyoness's church bells drifting up through the water on a quiet day, a mournful echo of a world erased. So why does this particular sunken kingdom resonate so deeply? Atlantis fell due to its own hubris, a punishment from angry gods, but Lyoness was simply there and then it was not. Its destruction feels less like a divine judgment and more like a capricious act of nature, a reminder that the ground beneath our feet is not as permanent as we believe. The story asks us a haunting question. Are we, too, living on a land that the sea is only waiting to reclaim? These stories of sunken cities and hidden valleys are far more than just ancient fiction. They endure because they speak to something fundamental within us, a deep-seated need to believe that our world holds more than what we can see and touch. At their core, these myths answer a profound psychological hunger for a better, more perfect existence. The Garden of Eden, the Golden Age, and Avalon all represent a primal longing for a paradise lost, a time or place of innocence and harmony that we feel, on some instinctive level, we were meant to inhabit. This is not mere escapism. It is a powerful form of hope, a belief that perfection is part of our original blueprint, and that its memory, however faint, guides our search for meaning and happiness in an often chaotic world. This yearning for paradise is matched by an equally powerful drive to explore the unknown. The blank spaces on ancient maps were not just empty, they were invitations. Legends like Hyperborea and the Kingdom of Sagene gave shape to that emptiness, transforming fear of the unfamiliar into the thrill of discovery. They provided a goal for the explorer and a dream for the stay-at-home, a shared cultural project that pushed the boundaries of the known world. These myths made the vast, terrifying ocean or the impenetrable jungle feel conquerable because they promised that something wondrous, not just more emptiness, lay on the other side. They gave courage to sailors and funded expeditions, proving that a compelling story can be as powerful a motivator as any treasure. Beyond hope and exploration, these realms serve a crucial function in explaining our own place in the cosmos. They are narrative tools we use to grapple with the biggest questions. Where did we come from? The myths of Mu and Lemuria offer grand, unifying origins, simplifying our complex, fragmented history into a single, glorious starting point. Why is there suffering in the world? The falls of Atlantis and Wise provide clear, moral answers, blaming human hubris and moral decay. What happens after we die? The intricate geographies of Hades and the Duat offer a structured, comprehensible afterlife, a map for the soul's final journey that makes the terrifying void of death feel manageable and just. These stories impose order on chaos, providing explanations for things that were, for millennia, utterly unexplainable. They are the frameworks upon which cultures built their understanding of justice, destiny, and the human condition. Finally, these myths endure because they are vessels for our potential. Shangri-La and Shambhala are not about a perfect past, but about a possible future. They imagine a society that has mastered wisdom, peace, and longevity, setting a benchmark for our own spiritual and cultural evolution. They ask us what we could become if we harnessed the best of our nature. In the end, whether we are searching for a physical city of gold or a spiritual state of grace, these 35 realms are mirrors. They reflect our timeless fears, our deepest desires, and our unshakable belief that magic, in some form, must still be waiting just beyond the edge of the map, or perhaps hidden in plain sight within the human heart. From the sunken bells of Lyoness to the celestial fortress of Asgard, these 35 realms form a breathtaking atlas of human longing. We have wandered through gardens of innocence and cities punished for their pride, navigated underworlds of judgment and paradises earned through virtue. Each one is a unique fingerprint of the culture that dreamed it, yet together they whisper a shared story about who we are. They are not random fantasies, but profound answers to the fundamental questions that have haunted us since we first looked at the stars. Why are we here? What happens when we die? And is there a place somewhere just beyond our sight where suffering does not exist? Our ancestors built these worlds from the raw materials of their hopes and fears, using myth as both a compass and a consolation. The relentless ocean that swallowed Atlantis also shaped the dream of a peaceful Magmel. The harsh social order of feudal Europe made the lazy gluttony of Kokani the ultimate rebellion. The Egyptian terror of a second death gave us the intricate, spell-protected journey through the Jewat. These realms are not escapes from reality, but deep engagements with it. They are the languages through which entire civilizations spoke their deepest truths about justice, morality, and the fragile beauty of life itself. So the next time you hear a story about a hidden valley or a lost city, listen closely. You are not just hearing a fairy tale, you are hearing the echo of a universal human conversation, a conversation about our place in a vast and mysterious cosmos. We would love to continue that conversation with you. Which of these 35 realms speaks most deeply to your own imagination? Do you believe the Garden of Eden was a real location, or is its power purely spiritual? Perhaps you have a theory about the final resting place of Atlantis or a favorite mythical land from your own culture's stories. Share your thoughts and discoveries in the comments below. The map of our collective imagination is never truly complete, and your voice is the next frontier.